Hi, and welcome to our webinar on considerations for restocking. I'm Jodie Rizet-O'Brien, and I'm part of the Sheep Connect team. Sheep Connect is supported by Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund, and Primary Industries and Regions South Australia. If you want more information about Sheep Connect, you can go to our website, sheepconnectsa.com.au, or you can follow us on Twitter. Today's webinar is presented by Amelia Gillen, and Amelia is one of our senior animal health officers based with PIRSA at Murray Bridge. Thanks, Amelia.
Thank you, Jodie. Okay, so today I'm talking about restocking sheep and the things you need to consider when you're looking at purchasing sheep to bring onto your property. So today I'm going to cover the questions to start thinking about and asking, thinking about your own biosecurity, what level of risk you're willing to accept, and what you're going to do when those sheep arrive on your property, how long you're going to quarantine them, whether they will need any treatments, and I'll touch on our program that we run through PIRSA, One Biosecurity. So what problems could you be buying in when you purchase sheep? There's obviously quite a list of different conditions you could be bringing on, and each of those have different treatment or management options around them. So there's worms, which could have some drench-resistant worms, foot rot, lice, ovine Johne's disease, ovine brucellosis, scabby mouth, and obviously weed seeds as well. So in terms of biosecurity on your property currently, are you happy with the current biosecurity, and what sort of level of risk are you willing to take? In terms of purchasing sheep, are you willing to lower this biosecurity to build your sheep numbers at this time of year, or are we going to keep that level of risk to a minimum to avoid bringing on problems that could last a number of years? Another consideration is what class of stock you'll be looking at purchasing. So is it just lambs for fattening with a short-term turnover, or are you looking at breeding ewes that will remain on the property for a number of years and will be mixed with your current flock? There may be the opportunity to ask questions of the vendors you're purchasing sheep off, and this would be a great time to discuss the disease status on that property and what sort of treatments and management occurs on that property. As a sheep producer, the best way to protect yourself from any biosecurity risk coming onto your property and to keep disease, pests and weeds at a minimum is to always ask the questions and insist on properly completed paperwork. So that's your National Vendor Declaration and your Sheep Health Statement. So that's obviously a requirement in South Australia to get that paperwork at the transaction, but obviously the more detail a vendor puts on that, the better it is for your management of those sheep. And then obviously there's the consideration of how you'll manage those sheep once they actually are offloaded, come off the truck. So this is the new Sheep Health Declaration that was released in July last year. You'll notice that there's no longer reference to the regional biosecurity plan areas. These are no longer a recognised zoning for OJD. However, there is still higher risk disease prevalent areas around Australia. I'll show you a map in a moment that highlights those areas. Another thing to make sure you're looking at is people's declaration around foot rot, whether they've had any signs of virulent foot rot or benign foot rot, whether they've had any lice in the consignment of sheep, and then there's all their claims around Johne's disease. Are they vaccinating with Guedere? Have they done any testing? The other information that is vital when you're bringing sheep onto your property is, have they had any recent treatments? Have they been shorn and treated for lice, drenched recently, and are they up to date with their clostridial vaccinations, scabby mouth vaccinations? So this is the map I was talking about. So the darker red areas are the more prevalent areas for Johne's disease, and then the lighter areas, the disease prevalence is a lot less. So keep in mind that map when you are looking for sheep interstate for what sort of level of disease areas they've come from. So in terms of bringing sheep in to South Australia, the entry requirements now require that all sheep have an NLIS ear tag, their National Sheep Health Declaration, and a National Vendor Declaration, preferably which includes the destination property, which will be your property. The only other requirements are that they don't have obvious signs of virulent foot rot. So on arrival, trucks coming to your property, you need to start thinking about how you're going to actually manage these sheep. Hopefully you've had a chance to ask questions from the vendor, or an agent's been able to find out some information, or you've at least been able to see the sheep health statement prior to their arrival. If you haven't seen that, hopefully it's on the truck and you're able to read that before you've done anything with you've considered a way that you're going to quarantine the sheep, and think about how long you're going to keep them separate from your own flock, and any treatments. Another thing to keep in mind is transferring them onto your property on the NLIS database. This is a requirement for the buyer to ensure that that process has been completed, whether it's done through your agent or done privately. The buyer is responsible to ensure it's been completed. So the sheep have arrived on your property. I'll just touch on each of the conditions that I mentioned before. So a consideration with worms: always assume that any sheep that you have purchased are carrying worms with them, and potentially some degree of drench resistance. So to avoid introducing problems into the rest of your flock, it's recommended that you do give them a quarantine drench, and that's a combination drench to ensure that you're knocking out as many of those worms as possible. At a minimum, if you can try and hold your sheep for at least 3 days to ensure that all the eggs are passed through the sheep. Obviously, the longer the better. If you're able to quarantine them and keep them separate from the rest of your flock, that's best to do for as long as possible. Another thing is to check that your treatment has been successful. It is good practice to do a worm test 14 days post-treatment, just to make sure your drenches have knocked out the worms. So for further information on this, you can go to the Worm Boss website. That's a really great resource to work through. And while they're in that quarantine for your worms, that also will allow any weed seeds to pass out as well. But another consideration will be any contamination of their fleece. So weeds such as horehound and Bathurst burr that are caught in the fleece. Either check the sheep over for any weed seeds, or if in doubt, recommend shearing them. Foot rot is another one to make sure you're checking for, especially if you don't have foot rot on your property. You don't want to be introducing a new problem. So inspecting the feet of all the sheep as they come off the truck, and consider doing a foot bath of all sheep as they enter your yards. Foot rot spread period is spring, which is ideally quarantining the sheep from mixing with any of your other sheep if you've got any hesitations on foot rot until that period has passed, and ensuring that they haven't brought foot rot on. If you do see any lameness or lesions and are unsure what they may be, contact PIRSA or your vet to investigate. Lice is another one. If you're buying shorn sheep, it's going to be harder to detect whether or not they are carrying any lice. Lice can take 3 to 6 months to build up to cause any sort of obvious signs. So if they are shorn, it's an idea to check that they've been treated, or potentially look at a backliner to just eliminate that risk. If they are in wool during the period you're quarantining, might be a good time to shear and treat them as well. Ovine brucellosis, if it's rams that you're purchasing, consider buying from an ovine brucellosis accredited stud to avoid bringing on OB. If it is ewes you're buying, ewes can be infected by the rams. However, they don't actually carry this infection long term. They generally can remain infective for 2 cycles. So you just don't want to be joining them with your own rams during that period. OJD we've covered earlier, but if you are buying from interstate and you're unsure of their OJD status, it's probably a good recommendation to vaccinate with Guedere. And what Guedere will do if they are an infected animal will reduce that level of shedding of the bacteria on your property, therefore reducing the contamination. And then the other considerations are their other vaccination status with scabby mouth and whether they're due for a booster or might be worth giving them a booster for your clostridial diseases with the change of environment and feed. So if you do unfortunately have any stock losses during this period, PIRSA's always interested in finding out what's going on out there. So get in contact with PIRSA or your local vet to investigate. And obviously you'll want to know what's going on, and we like to know what's happening out there as well. So reduce the impact on your property. And if you do suspect that it could be an exotic disease, please call the Emergency Animal Disease Hotline on 1800 675 888. So now I'll just touch on our One Biosecurity Program, which you may have heard about. PIRSA has developed this biosecurity program in collaboration with Livestock SA and South Australian livestock industry. It's a free to use tool. It's on the website where producers can record and assess their biosecurity practices and then share this information with other producers. So there's two components that you work through. Firstly, it's a biosecurity practice questionnaire, which assesses your current on-farm biosecurity practices and then generates an approved biosecurity plan. You then work through a number of disease risk ratings, which are specific to sheep diseases. We've got Johne's disease, lice, bovine brucellosis, and Footrot, and you get a rating for each of those as well. You can also generate a pre-populated animal health declaration, sale yard placards, and upload your accreditations and other information that may be relevant to your property, and receive your enhanced abattoir surveillance results. So it's an easy to access program. This here is your profile page, which will list your enterprises you have registered, and you can download your biosecurity plan, which you can then share and receive your enhanced abattoir surveillance results. And here is a representation of a sale yard placard, which you may want to produce when you're selling the biosecurity summary of your property, or people may see your profile online if they search your property. So One Biosecurity could also be used when you're looking at restocking as well. It is South Australian only, but you could search for particular properties or regions when you are looking for stock and see their biosecurity status. So to sign up, go to the One Biosecurity website that's listed there, or you can get assistance from your local animal health advisor, or there is a number there where you can get some support for signing up and any further information. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amelia. That was some great information for producers to consider when they're restocking their properties. Thanks to our audience for joining our Sheep Connect webinar. If you'd like some further information on Sheep Connect, contact us through our webpage or have a look at our other webinars on our YouTube channel. Thanks and have a lovely day.